of the places that that you stated as being special to you. So it really is great. We have both oceans that surround our country, and up in Alaska and the Caribbean, and even all the way over in Ireland. So it really is special and very exciting to see this display. So today on our webinar, we are going to hear from Reverend Talitha Arnold and Mark Hansen and Karan Ireland. And then I will go over some steps that people are able to take at home, and then we'll have time for questions. So like I said, if everyone that just joined us could mute themselves, we will stay muted the whole time just to assure that we can hear our presenters well. And then at the end, when it's time for questions, we'll take questions either by voice or by chat. So if there's a question as we're going through that you don't want to forget, you are more than welcome to type it into the chat box and send it to me, and we will do it that way just so that you don't forget. So we are going to start out with Reverend Talitha Arnold, and so I am going to pass it off to her, and she will start us off with the Sacredness of Water.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Trish, very much. I'd like to invite us to join together in the litany for the waters of life that you'll find on your screen. It's something that I wrote for the church that I served a number of years ago. I'm the senior minister for the United Church of Santa Fe in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the high desert area of northern New Mexico. We're at 7,000 feet, and we get about 12 inches of water dash rain dash snow a year. And this is a prayer that we use oftentimes, both in Lent and also other times. And I invite you to share it with me as we begin. We gather to worship God, the Lord and giver of life. God gives us the waters of new life. In the deserts of our lives, in the wilderness within, God gives us the waters of new life. To give us hope when our lives run dry, to give us strength when our world seems barren, God gives us the waters of new life. To let peace flow like a river and love spring forth like a fountain, gives us the waters of new life. To make justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a living stream, God gives us the waters of new life. To give us and our world a second chance and a new beginning, God gives us the waters of new life. Come, people of God, open your lives to receive God's new life. Open your hearts to sing God's praise. Amen. This is a litany that I wrote a number of years ago that seeks to do what I'd like to also do in this time we have on this webinar. I had been asked to cover sort of the theological and biblical foundation of the sacredness of water. And as you can tell from the litany, it draws upon both biblical references, peace, justice rolled down like waters and righteousness like a living stream from the book of Amos. It draws upon our hymnody tradition, peace flowing like a river and love like a fountain, but also from the pastoral experience of deserts and of hope when our lives run dry, all those kinds of things. To use water as an image in those kinds of contexts. So I'd like to go on to the next slide, and the 5 points that I'd like to make in terms of how it is and what we need to keep in mind when we consider both the theological and biblical understandings of water are these 5 things. That God gives us the water of life from beginning to end, that water is a sacred gift, not an economic commodity, that everyone has the right to water, that when we pray for rain, we also need to pray for righteousness. And finally, in the Christian tradition, to be baptized is to remember the source upstream and the neighbor downstream. I'd like to highlight and underscore the those 5 points. In our biblical tradition, water is the very first thing that's talked about at the very beginning of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, when God's Spirit moved over the face of the waters. So the very first verses from the book of Genesis talk about water. And then that theme of water continues all the way to the end of the Bible. In the book of Revelation, when John is shown the vision of the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, then he affirms that the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God. So from beginning to end and all throughout the middle of our biblical faith, water is at the very center of that faith. That also the biblical tradition and our Christian tradition offers us an understanding of water not as an economic commodity to be bought and sold, but instead as a sacred gift from God. There are numerous biblical passages that understand water in that way. The couple that I've highlighted for you are from the book of Job, where God finally answers Job's questions out of the whirlwind. And one of the things that God asks Job is, who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt, to bring rain on land where no person is, on the desert where there is no rain. God then goes on and also talks about in the next set of verses, has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the hoarfrost of heaven? That's just one of multiple examples throughout the wisdom literature, throughout the prophets, throughout the Psalms, that the Hebrew Bible has the understanding of water as a sacred gift, and that it is not to be treated as an economic commodity. And when we consider the desert place from which the biblical faith arose, that's a pretty amazing kind of understanding. And also when we consider the water wars that certainly go on in the southwest or the western part of the United States, but also water throughout, especially throughout the other dry places of this world, both thousands of years ago and here and now. But that water is fundamentally a gift and not an economic commodity. That then leads to the biblical understanding that everyone has the right to water. That water is like the air that we breathe, or the good earth on which we stand, is something that is to be shared and to be shared abundantly. From the book of Isaiah alone, there's the wonderful passage, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters." It goes on and talks about drinking deeply, and that water is to be shared equally and graciously and abundantly with one's neighbor. In the Deuteronomy Code, there are understandings not only of not plowing all the way to the end of your field, but leaving some for the poor and for the wildlife, but also an understanding of water is something that, because it comes from God and is a sacred gift of God, that everyone has a right to. And I think that is important to keep in mind as we talk about water policy, as we talk about the access to abundant water and to clean water. Oh, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. The third biblical understanding is that whenever in the biblical tradition, whenever people are asked to pray for rain, they're also told to pray for justice. And indeed, drought and the lack of water is seen throughout the prophets and the psalmists as a sign of the people's disobedience. There's numerous passages that underscore that. I'd like to share with you just a few. From the Psalm 68, the psalmist proclaims, "God gives the desolate a home to live in. God leads out the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious live in a parched land." If one is living in that parched land, it's because one has turned from God. Similarly, from Psalm 107, God turns rivers into a desert, springs of water into thirsty ground, a fruitful land into a salty waste, because of the wickedness of its inhabitants. When I came across that psalm, I couldn't help but think about all of the issues that go on at least in the U.S. Southwest, around who has a right to, say, the waters of the Colorado River or the waters of the Rio Grande. the Colorado River, which used to run all the way from its headwaters up in Wyoming down to the Gulf of Mexico. But in more recent years, because of all the dams that have been constructed in the last 75 to 100 years along the Colorado, it doesn't make it all the way to the sea. And in fact, by the time the Colorado River gets down to the Gulf of Mexico, it is salty, barren wasteland of a place. I wonder if the people who have built the dams have thought about Psalm 107, verse 33. I wouldn't say that it's because of the wickedness of its inhabitants, but that we always need to think about who's downstream from us when in our use of water. Similarly, just as the lack of water is seen as a sign of God's judgment on the people, so too are flash floods. Again, from the prophets, the prophet Isaiah more than once talks about flash floods of justice, if you will. At one point in chapter 30 of Isaiah, the prophet proclaims, God's breath is like an overflowing stream that reaches up to the neck. Or later on in chapter 59 of Isaiah, God will come like a pent-up stream that the wind of the Lord drives on. So that passage reminds me of the naturalist and writer Craig Childs, a southwestern writer who one time in a book called The Hidden Nature of Water speaks that there are two ways to die in the desert. You can die of thirst or you can die of drowning. And the ambiguous nature of water in the desert, sometimes as that which gives life, but sometimes as that which also takes life, I think is found in the passages that speak of either drought or flash floods as somehow a sign of God's disfavor because of the people turning away and abandoning not only God, but neighbor and care for creation. But then the opposite side of that is that water, rain, snow are all signs of God's favor and God's presence, and a sign of the people returning to the right relationship with God. From Psalm 68, this wonderful line, when the Almighty scattered the kings, snow fell on Zion finally. But finally, when people were returning to God as being the ruler of all, that the snow fell on Zion. Or from Psalm 84, happy are those whose strength is in you, and whose heart are the highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, which is an arid place on the way to Jerusalem, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. So that the awareness of the people that their strength is in God, that their hearts are highways to Zion, that then they find places of springs and early rains. So that water, snow, rain are signs of God's favor and presence and of returning to the right relationship with God. Interestingly enough, that understanding is also found in Native American cultures and Native American spiritual traditions that on a regular basis pray for rain, but also pray for the return of the right and harmonious relationship with the Creator and with all creation. Here's another word from the prophet Isaiah, linking praying for rain and praying for right relationship. From the 33rd chapter of Isaiah, those who walk righteously and speak uprightly, who despise the gain of oppression, who wave away a bribe instead of accepting it, who stop their ears from hearing of bloodshed and shut their eyes from looking on evil, they will live on the heights. Their refuge will be the fortress of rocks. Their food will be supplied, their water assured. I put that in bold because remember, this is being written and spoken to a people that live in a desert region, and the assurance of water is absolutely crucial for life. And that is offered to those who walk righteously and speak uprightly, who despise the gain of oppression. Then later on in Isaiah, those who pursue righteousness will have their deserts turned to gardens. Again, those are just a couple, three examples from all the way through Scripture the connection between praying for rain and praying for right relationships. A number of years ago in the church that I serve, when the mountains that surround Santa Fe were ablaze with fire, and we've had numerous fires since then, we held a prayer service here at the church that was praying, yes, for rain, but also for city councils and state governments and tribal councils and all of us individually to return to a right relationship for our use of water and the way in which we share that water with our neighbors and with all creation. Again, trying in a modern kind of way to make those links between rain and right relationship. I think bottom line is this understanding, that prayers for rain are not dependent on saying the right prayer or bringing the right sacrifice, but on establishing that right relationship with the poor, with the hungry, and indeed, I would add, with all creation. Underscore that direct link between righteousness and rain. And especially as we read about the drought, the continuing drought in California, as all throughout New Mexico and Arizona, issues of drought continue. We're, I think, in the 10th year of a 5-year drought out here, trying to work with our congregations about what does that mean individually and as communities of faith to try to restore that right relationship. Fourth point, in terms of God's gift of the waters of new life, is that to be baptized, final point actually, is to be baptized is to remember the source upstream and the neighbor downstream. To remember that sacred gift of water, and also that we're called to share it with those who live downstream from us. At the United Church of Santa Fe, we include that understanding whenever we baptize, whether it's a child or an infant or an adult or a teenager. We've added this question to our baptismal liturgy in addition to asking the congregation to affirm their blessing for the child or the individual about to be baptized, in addition to asking them to affirm their blessing for all of God's children and to recommit their care for all of God's children. We've added a third question now that the congregation is asked, and it goes like this. As we bless this water of baptism, the water that's in the font, will you also give thanks for God's gift of water in all ways and recommit yourself to the wise use of this sacred gift for the sake of generations yet to come? So that there's a direct link between the water in the baptismal font and the waters of all creation and our responsibility to care for that water and share that water now and in generations yet to come. We also include that same understanding in the prayer that we offer as a congregation over the water. We ask God's blessing that it might be a sign of new life for all of us and the seal of God's love in the life of the child. We ask God's blessing on that, with that same spirit on that child, that adult. But we also say at the very end, bless us as well, his or her family, this church family, and strengthen us in the vows we have made today with him or her, with all your children, and with all the waters of creation. It's a very simple kind of addition to the baptismal liturgy, but I think it makes that link between the waters that God gives us and the right relationship with that water and with all creation. So simply to reiterate that to live a baptized life is to remember the source upstream and the neighbor downstream. For me, those are the basic understandings of water as a sacred gift, God giving us the water of new life, now and always. Thank you, and I hope this is helpful to you and your congregations. I will turn it back to Trish to have the next person come forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reverend Arnold. That was really beautiful. We are going to kind of shift gears a little bit, but not too much. We're going to go from New Mexico to California, and we are going to hear from Mark Carlson, who is the director of the Lutheran Office of Public Policy in California. And so I am going to pass it off so that we can hear from Mark. Take it away, Mark.
Okay, I'm on. Thank you very much, Tricia and Pastor Arnold, for your beautiful words and images and getting us started in such a thoughtful way. This picture of me is with the 25,000 horsepower, 8 megawatt pump that moves water out of the Delta to Southern California. I'm going to go through some random slides to give you a flavor of what is a very daunting, complicated, and really unprecedented challenge. California has a heavily engineered water supply and distribution system. It includes the Colorado River, the Eastern Sierra watershed, where I'll be tomorrow for the annual Manzanar pilgrimage, and of course the Sierras and the Cascades, which have both state and federal systems that store and transport water south for agriculture and domestic use south of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. In looking at this pump, and this is one of a number of pumps at this facility, this is just a federal facility. There's a similar state facility nearby. You can understand why moving water around, whether to bring it to us or to remove it and treat it after we've used it, consumes 19% of the electrical energy consumed in California. And I'm looking, there we go. Oh, is this, we just went to 22. How do I get back to the beginning? There we go. Try to do next here. So this is the Sacramento Water Treatment Plant, and in the fine print above the building, you can see the Ezekiel passage 47, verse 9. In this case, it reads, "Everything shall live whithersoever the river cometh." Now, the river has been historically low, so they're re-engineering this facility to avoid pumping mud into the water treatment plant. That's just symptomatic of the difficulty, the challenge of the drought. One of the issues, a big issue, but sort of a side drama in all this, is the governor's proposal, and a lot of smart people are behind this, to build a tunnel structure that would move water under the Delta from the Sacramento River, good quality water, to these pumping stations that I've described. And it's a very contentious, controversial project depending on what part of the state you live in. And a lot of it has to do with trust in how much water would be moved at what particular time. But a fundamental critical question is, will there be water to move in the tunnel? Okay, my computer's being really slow here. And don't worry, we've worked out a legislative, well, I guess I'm not giving it time to work, apparently. You saw how complicated our plumbing system is, or what Larry Rasmussen calls a geoengineered system. Here's Larry at a vineyard owned by a Lutheran family that's demonstrating how they're going to do vine to chalice communion wine work. And right across the river from this vineyard is where the tunnel intakes would be that would move the water around the Delta and to those pumping stations and then move it south. There we go. We may be voting on a water bond and water policy measure in November. The legislature is in fierce debate over a number of proposals, and it will be expensive, but it needs to be done, and voters are demanding action. So this is a summary from the Public Policy Institute of California. You can go to their website, ppic.org. And there's lots of water information there, as well as, of course, the state agency websites. Major drought, that's an understatement. Today is the annual fisheries forum over at the Capitol. I had that on my TV earlier this morning. They're talking about apocalypse, about Armageddon, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and Willy Wonka's elevator. So lots of colorful language describing the situation we're in. The drought will be particularly hard in the agricultural sector. That again is an understatement. It's particularly around farm water, it has been highly politicized, and some are alleging that this is a human-caused drought because we haven't built enough dams and reservoirs to store water for times like this. That's a phony argument. There will be high unemployment. There already is in farm worker communities, and there have been tens of millions of federal and state dollars already allocated toward food relief and safety net relief for unemployed farm workers. One number I heard the other day is 20,000 unemployed farm workers. The sheriff of Fresno County has written federal water managers asking that more water be released because high unemployment in their experience means more crime, so she's framing this as a public safety issue. The environment is also being hit hard. That's waterfowl, wildlife refuges, but particularly fisheries in so many different ways. The Armageddon option, which was referred to at the Fisheries Forum this morning, has to do with rescuing salmon and other fish and trucking them to where colder water will be available. A lot of attention to water temperature, and of course that relates to water flow and what that has to do with fish survivability. And of course rural economies dependent on fishing as well as the salmon fisheries, ocean salmon as well. Smaller rural communities will need special help. There are about somewhere in the order of 20 communities that are looking to have their water supplies completely dry up unless extraordinary measures are taken to hook them up to some other source. This, you can see on the right, 2013 was the lowest calendar year on record. The benchmark for that is 1976, you can see, and we've had a little more water. Our water year is different than the calendar year. It runs from July through June, so we've got a little more water. We're up to a little bit above 1976 now. But this statistic is compelling evidence to refute those who suggest that the drought is human-caused and is a result of environmental protections and political decisions. This is Greg Massa facing the camera. He's an organic grower near the Sacramento River in Butte County, about 100 miles north of Sacramento. He grows organic almonds and rice. Revolution Foods, which is a food service provider for schools, is a major customer for him. And this is a blessing of his field, his almond orchard, by a group that was of Lutheran hunger leaders that visited his farm a year ago in January. Greg and Raquel will be at the Wild Goose Festival in Asheville, North Carolina at the end of June. He just told me that on Sunday, where I worshiped at his congregation. And he also told me that, and this was reported in the Fisheries Forum this morning, that he had been reduced to 40% of his water allocation, but with the recent rains in March and April, he's up to 75% of his allocation. This slide, again from the Public Policy Institute, shows urban and agriculture water consumption, and if you can read that, agricultural consumption is about 4 times urban consumption. There's a little slice under urban consumption for energy production, so it's pretty low, but that could be changing with fracking. One of the impacts of the drought is that hydroelectric capacity is diminished, so we'll be depending more on Columbia River dams as well as inland coal plants in the Four Corners area and throughout the Mountain West, the coal plants that feed our grid in the summer. Under the agriculture side, the biggest chunk is fruits and nuts. Unfortunately, some of those have been planted in areas with very uncertain and not promised water supplies, so you've got expensive perennial crops in areas south of the Delta that are really not sustainable and inappropriate for fruit and nut production. Today's Sacramento Bee had a cartoon of Dianne Feinstein, Senator Feinstein, in a big ocean-going ship loaded with almonds, plowing over and crushing a small delta farmer or a small delta person fishing in a small boat in the delta. The message being that the farmers south of the delta take precedence over the health of ecosystems as well as even farmers elsewhere. And under irrigated pasture and alfalfa, those are livestock crops, so where we eat on the food chain matters as far as water consumption, as we all know. Here's water being pumped out of Kern County over the Grapevine along I-5 to Los Angeles and points south, and the oil wells there are in an area where there is a proposed heavy hydraulic fracturing enhanced oil recovery, which will involve both risks to groundwater as well as actual water consumption for the fracking. So you can see pumping this water up over this hill is one reason why it takes a lot of electricity. This is dust blowing in Kern County in January, just between Bakersfield and La Paz, Keene, the National Chavez Center. And finally, a couple of not so small side dramas to this is access to water for disadvantaged communities. Thirsty for Justice is a new film that's just coming out that's will be premiered here in Sacramento in May, produced by the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry. And you can see a website, ejcw.org/thirsty. And that has to do with legislation that passed and was quite controversial because it asserted and embraced the human right to water, but was ultimately passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, and now the challenge is to implement it in these communities, many Spanish-speaking farm work communities and some urban communities too that have contaminated groundwater, either through agricultural chemicals, nitrates, or industrial solvents and that sort of thing. And the Sacred Land Film Project has to do with, in our case in California, the proposal to raise Shasta Dam, which is getting a lot more airtime and is more attractive to people, again, especially to farmers and people in Southern California who are facing cutbacks. And among all the surface storage proposals, and it's an article of faith that environmental groups are opposed to surface storage and dams, and it's an article of faith that farmers and Southern California people want more surface storage. And in the mix of that is a proposal to raise Shasta Dam, which would flood the grounds of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe and their historic homeland. They're an unrecognized tribe. They're not a landed tribe, but this is their culture and their history and a very sacred spot for them. So the Sacred Land Film Project is quite an ambitious global project, but it has a piece on the Winnemem-Wintu and the raising of the Shasta Dam, and it's very poignant, powerful, and persuasive film. So again, this question has global implications. This is the Dalles Dam, which in 1957 flooded the traditional fishing grounds for a number of tribes, the center of the economy and culture for Native Americans for thousands of years. My dad was a pastor nearby and took me there, and just before it flooded, and said never to forget it. And it seems like people are anticipating a repetition of that when it comes to Shasta Dam or perhaps other sites. And I think this is the last slide. Tongue River should be question mark. I took this on the same flight that from Portland to Chicago that I took the Dalles Dam slide of, and we had just flown over Billings. The pilot announced it, and I looked out the window, and I recall when I was in the environmental studies program at the University of Montana and going out to that part of the state to look at energy, coal, and power plant development, the story of an Episcopalian congregation and people on both sides of the coal issue suing each other. But at the same time, they went to the Lord's table together, and the Tongue River was the heart of that lawsuit. And if you can tell in this photo, there are strip mines on both sides of this this waterway. So it should be question mark. I haven't fact-checked this, but that's my concluding slide as far as I know. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark. We are going to shift a little, go from California to West Virginia, and shift in our thinking from issues around water quantity to issues of water quality. So I am going to pass it off to Karan, Ireland, and I'm going to upload a video very quickly. But Karan lives in Charleston, West Virginia, and as I'm sure that you all have heard, they had a few water issues of their own. So I am going to pass it off, and Karan, take it away.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, Tricia. My name is Karan, Ireland, and I live in Charleston, West Virginia, in the Kanawha Valley, which is the site of the Elk River chemical spill that happened on January 9th of this year. And I have started to refer to it. We've been calling it the water crisis. We've been calling it the chemical spill. And I have started to refer to it as the largest chemical contamination of a drinking water supply in U.S. history, because that's the truth. And sometimes I think some of the other monikers that we give the event tend to minimize what has happened here. I am a resident of Charleston. I'm a mother. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And I'm a consumer of tap water. And by consumer, I mean that I physically consume tap water, and I purchase tap water from a privatized company here in Charleston called West Virginia American Water, which is part of the American Water Company. And that will be relevant in just a minute. This is my hometown. This is Charleston, West Virginia, and this is the confluence of the Elk and Kanawha Rivers. To the right, you can see the Capitol Dome, the gold dome of our capital. And Charleston, the metro area, has about 150,000 people. The city itself, about 55,000. This is a picture of Freedom Industries. And Freedom Industries is a company that has stored chemicals, including MCHM, which is the chemical that leaked into the Elk River. And that chemical is methylcyclohexane methanol. We've just started calling it MCHM, which is a lot easier. 10,000 gallons of which leaked into the river about a mile upstream from Charleston's singular water intake. And just to give you a little background of the event, this tank farm is along I-79. I live about a mile over the hill from the tank farm, and I drove by it every day and never thought a thing about it. I didn't wonder what was stored there. It didn't occur to me. I mean, I didn't think it was very pretty, but I never thought more than that about it until the morning of the 9th. And you can see in the picture of West Virginia, the affected area included 9 counties and about 300,000 people, affected about 300,000 people. On the morning of January 9th, the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection received odor complaints, people complaining about a sweet licorice-like smell, and they sent some of their inspectors over to the Freedom Industry complex, where they were turned away initially, told that there was no leak. And they persisted and got onto the property and found that, in fact, there was a leak about 4 feet wide, a stream of the chemical that had leaked from a 1-inch hole in one of the tanks down, kind of overrun a secondary containment unit and was leaking directly into the river. The water company said that that initially the DEP did not know what the chemical was. The water company was made aware that there was a chemical headed downstream. And then in the afternoon, the water company did send an announcement out through social media that there had been a chemical detected, but it was benign, and there was no boil water advisory, no do not use in place or anything. But then around 6 p.m. that evening, they learned more about the chemical, and they did put a do not use order in place. They did that, again, through social media, the news outlets. There were several mistakes made kind of over the course of the entire incident, and one of which was that local responders, emergency planning commissions, did not use the siren that we hear every Wednesday at noon. Every Wednesday at noon, they test that system. It's a loud siren that you can hear pretty much around the county, at least in the downtown area, which warns us of an impending problem. Canal Valley is somewhat affectionately known as Chemical Valley, and it's the home to a lot of chemical plants. We've had Bayer Crop Science and Dow and Union Carbide over the years. But we were placed under a do not use that affected 9 counties, 300,000 people, and that began on January 9th. Personally, I'll let you know that I smelled what I later learned to know as the smell of MCHM 2 days prior to the 9th. On the 7th, I smelled it in my upstairs bathroom, but I didn't associate it with water. I took a shower the next morning, a lengthy shower. We had a very cold couple of days, and the kids had a delay, so I was able to kind of take my time getting ready for work and stayed in a steamy hot shower. And immediately after getting out, I began to be sick. I had chills, and I felt nauseous, and seemed to develop a quick, deep cough deep in my chest. So I ended up in bed for the next day or two. And I believe that now to be as a result of taking a shower in the chemical, basically. And in fact, they did confirm that the leak would have started prior to the 9th. So this picture is a slide of a water distribution. We had people, immediately kind of put a run on stores for drinking water. We weren't allowed to drink, bathe, cook with the water. We were only supposed to use it to flush toilets and put out fires. And so churches from other communities, university students, people gathered water from Kentucky, from counties in West Virginia that weren't affected, from North Carolina, from neighboring communities, and trucked the water to West Virginia. And a lot of people really worked hard together to come together and get that water out to people. This picture is my son is on the ramp. My daughter is on the left, and some teenage friends that I took to a community in Prenter, West Virginia, whose groundwater had been affected by chemicals that had seeped into the groundwater from adjacent coal mines and slurry ponds. And this started for them in 2006. And there are areas like this kind of all over the southern coal fields of West Virginia. And I didn't realize Prenter is about 45 minutes from where I live, and yet I had no idea that they had so many problems with their drinking water. And they had to fight to get West Virginia American Water to run water to their communities. And then, of course, so that happened a couple of years ago, and then they were placed under the do not use ban. And the reason that I took my kids to Printer particularly is because my son, who's 13, told me that he informed me that he is a friend of coal, which is kind of a marketing campaign that the Coal Association uses here in West Virginia. So a lot of people are friends of coal, and I just wanted to give him kind of a broader idea of some of the pros and cons of coal mining practices. This is me and my daughter. We're speaking at the state capitol, and a lot of what kind of my personal role in this, I started a citizen action group with a friend of mine, and we lobbied at the Capitol as citizen lobbyists, which was an experience. This is my daughter Genevieve talking, and
Yes, this is Trisha. I am going to go ahead and pull up a video of Genevieve speaking because it is wonderful and I want everyone to hear it. One thing I just wanted to mention while I'm doing this is that I've gotten a couple of comments. All of the information that's being shared will be shared with all of you after the webinar, so don't worry about taking notes or anything. But here is Genevieve speaking.
I am worried, not just me, but everyone else here. Parents are not the only ones who want answers. I haven't learned for a week because the school's been closed. My brother drinks soda, but I try to be healthy and drink water. And now you are telling me that my water is not safe? After they told us the water was safe, more and more people started drinking it. So why are they ending up with rashes and in the doctor's office? I refuse to drink tap water because I feel it is not safe if pregnant women are warned not to drink it. My friends and I are the future of West Virginia, and we are aware.
Great. So I'm going to pass it back to Karen.
I'll be brief.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, and just a little bit, when I started to try to figure out how I was going to do this talk in 10 minutes, and I apologize if I've been skipping around a lot, but it was such a huge event. It really was. In terms of the do not use ban, there's very little information on the chemical itself, only one study done by the manufacturer of the chemical, which was done in the 80s, and it involved lab rats. There was miscommunication from the governor's office. Once the do not use ban was lifted, people were still smelling it and becoming ill. And then the CDC came out and said that pregnant women should not drink the water. So there was, an uproar about that, understandably. And this slide kind of has to do with what our community has done to be involved, to get people involved. This town hall picture was just from Monday night, and it has our congressional delegation along with state senator, the president of West Virginia American Water, and the director of the Charleston Health Department. And you'll have to excuse me, my dog is barking. But our goal is to get people to really pay attention to their water supply, to the legislation that affects it, to the departments that are charged with regulating companies that might harm it. And I'll be glad to answer any questions, and thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Now that we have heard about the spirituality related to water and stories from California and West Virginia, I just wanted to quickly run through some things that you can do at home. There are many things that you can do on a personal level to help conserve water, whether that's in your home or garden or church or wherever. I'm sure people have heard of the Energy Star program. Well, the EPA also has a similar program for water, and it's called WaterSense. And it's in the same manner as Energy Star, where different products can be WaterSense certified, such as low-flow faucets and toilets, or dishwashers and washing machines that conserve water. So the WaterSense website has numerous tips and ideas, not only for products, but also for ideas for water-friendly landscaping and gardening practices. So no need to write any of this down. These resources will be emailed out to you following the webinar. Beyond things that you can do on a personal level, if you are interested in advocacy, there's a current issue that we would love for you to weigh in on. The EPA has issued a proposed rule called Waters of the U.S., and it's a clarification of the Clean Water Act. And this rule clarifies what constitutes a water of the U.S., which sounds kind of silly, but it allows for less complicated regulations. So traditional waters of the U.S. have been navigable waters. So a lot of the waters that there were pins on in the map before that we all said were special places to us, those like lakes and rivers, those are traditional navigable waters. But our streams and wetlands are incredibly interconnected. And this rule really clarifies that these streams and wetlands that feed into our larger bodies of water, which often provide us with clean drinking water, can be protected on the federal level. So the EPA is looking for comments on this rule, and the faith community has a really important voice to be heard on this issue. So I'll be sending out a link to provide comments in an email to everyone, along with some suggested messaging if you would prefer to use that. And moving on also from things that you can change in your home or office and the advocacy portion, we also ask that you pray for your water and the water across the earth. And no prayer is too small. Reverend Arnold gave us some wonderful ideas about what to do in our churches, and we think that you could go out to a local water source with your congregation or bring some water to your church and have a blessing. Our Earth Day resource is called Water, Holy Water, and it's available with more information about the sacredness of water. So those are that's just the tip of the iceberg on things that you can do around water. But now that we've heard from all of our presenters and gotten a few tips, I would like to open it up for questions for our presenters. So I know that I have received a few questions in the chat box, but so if you have a question that you would like to ask, if you could raise your virtual hand. I'm going to start off with a question that was submitted just a little while ago, but one of the questions that we received was about the drought in California. So Mark, this question is going to be for you, or even Reverend Arnold, who's also dealing with drought. Has there been any discussion about the effect of our changing climate in regards to the drought in the West? And I don't know if Mark or Talitha wants to handle that.
Yeah, this is Mark. I think that's just sort of for many people assumed, and that this is of course, no one weather event or few years of weather events can be directly linked cause and effect to climate change, but all the trends and all the indicators, scientific indicators are there, and the physical evidence of larger, more catastrophic fires, that sort of thing. The evidence is pretty convincing that this is human caused to a significant degree, and then yet there are people in denial because they don't want to address climate change because that means changing the energy economy in a significant way.
I agree. I mean, there's a very fine book by the author William DeBuys, D-E-B-U-Y-S, called The Great Aridness, Climate Change in the American Southwest. And it came out about 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, there's no doubt in my mind, based on the scientific evidence, of the relationship between the drought conditions and climate change. and also the impact of human energy consumption and greenhouse gases on that climate change. And part of it too is that I grew up in the Phoenix area, and that actually experienced a microclimate change years ago. Phoenix is much hotter than it used to be. Because there's so much more building and so many more buildings, streets, etc. We lived in the Phoenix Valley without air conditioning, and you could not possibly do that now. And the same thing is the water table is shrunk immensely, not only because it's being pumped up, but because it is just so much hotter. It gets hotter sooner, it stays hotter longer, it doesn't get below 85 degrees for many weeks in the summertime. All of that is new in the last number of decades in the Phoenix Valley. And so there's global climate change that affects water, and there's also localized climate change, like in some of these high-density concrete asphalt urban areas.
Great. Thank you, Mark and Talitha. That was wonderful. And that question came to us from Sharon Wilson, so thank you for that great question. Switching over to West Virginia, we have a question here from Leslie. And Karan, I don't know if you can speak to this question or not, but she asks if there was any involvement from the Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And did they do anything for your community, or what is kind of the update of the situation now?
I'm not sure if they did anything here, and in fact, that's kind of, as we dig out of this, a lot of my questions and some friends of mine that have been working on legislation and policy have asked, you know, where was the EPA? We had an issue with some of the information that we were getting from the CDC. Mistrust is at an all-time high, I would say, when it comes to the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, which is sort of known for its lax enforcement of regulations, particularly as it pertains to the mining industry. But I'm not able to speak directly to that agency.
Great, thank you, Karan. There was also a question, if we stay in West Virginia for right now, about the pollution. And do you think that the privatization of the water supply had any effect on how the crisis played out?
Yes. I mean, the water company routinely sends pamphlets with its bills talking about the quality of its water and that it's award-winning. But I think there were, you know, maybe a handful of people probably knew that we had a singular intake, and that there was no plan in place. You know, this tank farm was a mile, maybe a mile and a half directly upstream from the water intake, and the water company had no idea what was in those tanks. Now, Freedom Industries had a responsibility to report that, and in fact, they had reported what was in the tanks, but the water company made no effort to inventory what was directly upstream. So there's been a push here to talk about either the municipal government or the county government using eminent domain to take over the water company. That's something that we're looking into, and there's also a push to require or ask that the Public Service Commission, which is sort of the regulatory agency that mostly deals with rates but has the ability to look at infrastructure, that they do a general investigation about what could have been done better by the water company.
Great, thank you, Karan. I want to be conscious of people's time, so we'll go ahead and take one more question. And please be assured that you will get all of this information sent to you and we will continue these water conversations. But before we leave, I just want to go back to California. And there was a question about the tunneling under the delta. And Mark, can you say anything about the effect that that has on the delta ecosystem and the wildlife, to your knowledge? Mark, are you on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there you are. Did you hear my question?
I did. I was trying to manipulate this. Something about, repeat it, please.
Yeah, so Sharon asked regarding the tunneling under the delta. Can you speak to the effect that that has on the delta ecosystem and the wildlife, to your knowledge?
No, I'm not an expert in that. I would say that there are very credible people on all sides of that are making claims, and some of it is, you know, more based on science, and some is more based on fear and self-interest, and that's a tricky question. I think people agree that the delta ecosystem is collapsing, that something needs to be done, but there are differing opinions over whether the tunnel is an appropriate and cost-effective way to do that. For myself, I've kind of tried to keep an open mind. There are good arguments on all sides of this, and it's a question of ultimately of values and of people's willingness to pay, and then the equity questions of who pays and who benefits, and those are real serious equity questions. There are other engineering solutions that would take public resources in part to address the health of the delta as well. But the status quo, everybody agrees, is not acceptable. And trust is a huge issue about especially if the tunnels are built, if they have the capacity to take all the water out of the Sacramento River, which might be physically possible. Would that ever conceivably happen, under what circumstances? And that's where the trust question comes to bear.
Got it. Thank you, Mark. Well, like I said, I want to be mindful for people on the East Coast that they can get home in time to see their families for dinner. So we are going to cut our webinar now, but I just want to thank our presenters, Reverend Talitha Arnold, Mark Carlson, and Karan Ireland. And be on the lookout for an email in your inboxes with this presentation and all of the information that was shared today from our presenters. And thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful Earth Day Sunday.